Good morning. Can you hear me? Welcome. I'm not sure we have any Zoomers, but people who are live streaming, welcome. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping. Next week, we do not have a speaker, but we want you to come because we're doing a feedback session to talk about the speakers we've already heard from. We do have 3 more speakers this May to June 5th, but we also want to have some feedback of maybe you know some other folks we should listen to and hear more about their nonprofit or organization. May 15th, we have rescheduled Bill Shelton from Habitat. May 22nd, we have Ann Benfield, Cabarrus Partnership for Children, the needs of our youngest children and their families. And our final one for the year, or school year, is June 5th with Ed Hosak from CCM. And he'll be talking about housing and food insecurity. Okay. Well, for those who were here today and heard Emily's sermon, Life is Messy, we'd love to have the campfire, kumbaya life, but we don't. And thank you, Emily, for that. And today is a messy one of those speakers. But in order to reach out in our community, we have to know what's going on in our community. So before I introduce our speaker, let us pray. God of all creation, fill us with a passion for justice and dignity for each neighbor in our community. Guide and support us through Koinonia to follow your example and your command, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with you. Transform us through your Spirit to become conduits of your love and compassion in all that we do, so we become reconciled to you and your creation. In the name of the triune God, amen. Our speaker today is Biastas. She is the Communications Director for Present Age Ministries, an organization that is committed to combating the sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking of teen girls. Present Age Ministries has achieved this for the last 13 years through the development and implementation of sustainable programs for females ages 12 through 18. Cami has been in the anti-trafficking space for 10 years, has actively partnered with communities in 8 U.S. states, and manages the Present Age Kenya staff. She is responsible for coordinating trainings, cultivating relationships in the community, and connecting individuals to volunteer opportunities at Present Age. Cami is from Washington State and still retains Seattle Seahawk pride. She enjoys hiking and spending time outdoors, but is passionate about seeing communities equipped to identify at-risk teen girls through prevention and awareness education, and to support survivors through holistic, individualized care. Please help me in welcoming Cami Biastas.
Thank you so much, Miss Karen. I really appreciate being here with y'all today. I'm just thrilled to meet you all. And can you hear me? Can you hear me now? All right, we're gonna do our best today. But my time here with you today, we are gonna talk about human trafficking, which is a little intense. But I also see this divine appointment moment where y'all opened up with identity today. Miss Emily, that was fantastic. Please help me. Help a sister. Perfect. Yeah. Well, you fix me and I'll talk. How about that? All right. I won't say anything too important.
Yeah, just act as if I'm not here. Try that.
That'll work. That works for me. All right. I'll just be careful. So my name is Biastas. I have been on the Present Age team for about 4 years. I started out as a volunteer for about 3 years, and then I've joined staff now a little over a year. Started out part-time. I think that lasted about a month, and then became a full-time member. So I absolutely love what I do, but it is a little intense. So fair warning on that. We are going to go deep today because it matters, right? And this is what's really happening in our community. So it is my goal to, you're not going to be able to meet all of our beautiful girls that we have. And so what I get to do is tell you their stories in a very confidential and safe way. But also, my goal is to equip you to understand what this really looks like in our local community. Does that make sense? All right, so, too fast. So at Present Age Ministries, we do have 3 core programs. First one being awareness. That's where we get to do fun things like this, where I get to come out to the community, get to talk to you a little bit, and just explain what this really looks like in our local community. What you see on the news may not be what's actually happening locally for us. So we'll do general awareness where, we can just talk to everybody, and we'll also do industry-specific trainings. So we train law enforcement, we train healthcare, anybody who would come into contact with a survivor of human trafficking, which would be anybody in the community. But when we talk to law enforcement or healthcare agencies, we're able to get a little bit deeper and more specific. What would this look like for them? What are those kind of warning signs that they would encounter? And then what do they do about it, right? Our second branch of our organization is prevention. So what we get to do within our prevention programming, we get to go into schools. This is where we get to just help students identify what is happening, right? We'll go into schools and we'll talk about abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. So for them, most of the time, they can't conceptualize what this actually means. So I was talking to a 13-year-old, and she was actually confiding in me, and she was sharing a little bit about what's happening in her life. And she said, well, these different things are happening within the house. And so I just honestly asked her straight up, are you being abused at home? No. And she meant it, right? So then I said, well, are you being hit, kicked, slapped at home? Oh, yeah. But for her, abuse is this thing that doesn't happen often, right? This stuff that happens is my daily life. But abuse is that one-time situation, right? And so for her, she couldn't connect the dots. And so for us, what we see a lot is when we go into the schools and we explain what is exploitation, what is trafficking, we're often giving them the verbiage for the first time. And so then they can talk back to us and say, oh yeah, I identify with that. Now I have words to explain either what's happening to me or what has happened to me. And so most of us in here can kind of grasp what abuse looks like. Exploitation essentially means there's an exchange happening, right? Commercial sex acts with an exchange. The law says, well, we'll get into that here in a minute. But so that would be our prevention programming where we go into schools. But what we found was maybe we have a situation that is trafficking and we can go ahead and move them into direct services. But what if we can't identify it as trafficking, right? Maybe one of our educators recognizes that this is a situation that is just high risk, right? Maybe this individual has a lot of red flags, there's a lot of vulnerabilities here, but not necessarily a trafficker involved, or maybe I can't tell if a trafficker is involved. What do we do then? Good luck. No. So what we did is we created a small group program. So basically this is 10 or less. It's created for teen girls. And what we do is we take those high risk, highly vulnerable individuals, maybe they have a lot going on in their world, and we just do an 8-week small group. It really is nothing profound, right? Most of the time we are just talking about healthy boundaries, healthy relationships. We usually have to break apart romantic relationships and non-romantic relationships. So when we say non-romantic relationships, what does that mean? They literally cannot answer. And so we say, your teacher, your softball coach. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. I see that now, how that would be inappropriate, right? But we really have to explain to them. Most of them have broken boundaries before. Somebody who should have been trusted was not trustworthy, right? And broke those boundaries. And so now there's this fuzzy place around boundaries. So when we have those conversations, we get to say, again, what is healthy, what is truth, right? So that's what that looks like. They do last 8 weeks, and it is the most beautiful program I have ever seen. I've been in anti-trafficking for about 10 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this. Present Age Ministries actually developed a game board. It's like 6 foot by 6 foot. And so the girls get to play it with each other, which is a totally different aspect than an adult telling you you shouldn't. Right? Instead, what happens is these girls get to talk to each other, right? It's really self-facilitated, or at least it seems that way. We're actually in control the whole time, but it seems like it's self-facilitated, and so there'll be a question like, after a date, what's expected of you? And we get all the answers you can imagine, right? And so what's really beautiful is there's always one in the group that goes, nope, you don't owe him anything. Nope, it's just dinner, right? And so what's really nice is they will correct each other, right? And so most of them do not answer, I owe him nothing. That's a very rare answer. But there's usually one in the group that will have that perspective on any given question. So that's a little bit about what our small groups look like. After that, they mostly just, we break down the different aspects that we played in the game, right? So we talk about those relationships and boundaries. We talk about cultural influences. What music are you listening to? And 100% of the time, I don't listen to the words, I just like the beat, right? Okay, but you can also tell me every word. So what are those words actually saying? Right? And so 100% of the time, that's what that night looks like. We'll also do just talking through self-image, right? All of those different aspects that really are impacting them, because the world is telling them this is the answer, right? The world is telling our girls, you should go to the strip club because you can get tons of money, right? Traffickers are telling our girls it's worth more than being free, right? You're more valuable than giving it away for free. So you should charge people, right? These are some horrific lies, and from our perspective, we can see how the enemy is just twisting this, right? God's truth is that you are priceless, right? There is actually no value that you can put on yourself, right? And so for us, we get to really speak that truth, and often it's the first time that they're hearing you're priceless, right? So that's what that looks like. Within our direct service program, that's the third pillar of our organization, this is what we're most known for. We will work with individuals that are identified as exploited or trafficked. A lot of these referrals come from law enforcement, come from healthcare agencies, come from DSS, come from juvenile justice, come from our schools, come from our community partners. It's actually pretty well spread across, and so anytime we do awareness like this, you are the eyes and the ears in the community. And so I do have some little handouts for you if you want them with warning signs, and we'll talk about those a little bit. But it is so important that everyone who has eyes and ears are paying attention. If your gut says something doesn't seem right, you're probably right. If it's human trafficking or domestic violence or substance abuse or all these different things, that's somebody else's job to figure it out. But if your gut says something is wrong, let's do something. And we'll talk about what can do. But within Present Age, what we do is once we have an identified individual, we're going to provide wraparound services, which means everything, right? And if we can't provide it, we're going to find somebody who does. So for us, we work with exclusively minors, so 12 to 18. Usually 12. The last year or two, we've actually taken under 12, just because they're here and they need our services. Usually we can pull in the child advocacy centers and they can handle the situation, but we've had a few in the last year that are a little out of their scope and more in our territory. So we are taking now down to 7. We have 7 is the youngest. And when I say 7-year-olds, I am talking about a trafficking victim, right? We've had pregnant 12-year-olds, right? And so this is really happening in our community. Within our direct services, what we'll do is we do, first thing, an assessment. Who are you, right? What's going on? And if they answer that question, we're doing good, to be honest. They usually don't like us, but on the positive side, they don't like law enforcement even more. So law enforcement's always involved. Community protocol is that DSS and law enforcement will get involved, and then they call us, which is beautiful because we're a faith-based organization that's a nonprofit, and we don't have the red tape they do. So we work very well with our community partners. They'll give us a call and say there's a recovery. We are able to then help kind of navigate those assessments from the victim side, right? Having that perspective, where instead of taking them to the law enforcement precinct, which was community protocol, if law enforcement puts them in the back of the cop car and takes them to the detention center, now we have some different protocols where either they go to the hospital, and we're working on a new protocol where they can come to us and spend that first day or so with us in a very sweet environment where we have cute pictures on the wall and all those things. So we do a medical evaluation, right? And we pull in our medical partners for that as well. So STD testing, STI testing, pregnancy testing, all of that stuff. Psychological, we always provide counseling. I think we've only ever had one child that we offer it at the very beginning, and she's like, yes, I want this. Right? Most of them say, absolutely not, I don't want anything to do with that. But once they get to know our team a little bit, we build some trust, then they buy in. Relational, we work with minors, so we have to figure out, number one, who do you live with, right? What's your support system? Do you have one? Do you have a faith-based family or a church family that you can, get that additional support from? If not, we have a mentorship program, and so we'll kind of work with that as well, provide those different things. Intellectual, they are all minors, so are they in school? Do they need to be in a different school? Do we need to do something different and do a virtual option? Or do we just need to work through some trauma before we try doing math, right? When we have a 12-year-old that's 8 months pregnant, we have to decide between parenting classes and math, right? And that's a decision that we pull Jesus into. And then the spiritual side, obviously, we are a faith-based organization, and so we're always going to provide a Bible. We're always going to have those conversations, but we're also very clear that you do not have to believe what we believe. Here's what we believe. We don't hide it. Present age is based off of Titus 2:11. But what we really do is talk through and really walk it out rather than talking about it, right? So we'll address it in the very beginning so that they don't feel tricked or manipulated. And then we just say, what do you believe about God? Most of them do not have a positive response, but we also get to see miracles at this point, right? So I just shared a lot, but we're going to fly through these next slides. I just show you that we didn't wake up today and decide this is what we want to do. We've been in this community for 13 years. We sit on many of these task forces. We chair committees on the task forces. We sit on more task forces than what you see here, but at the regional and state level, we help develop, I think right now we're partnering with 4 other agencies within the U.S. that are trying to do what we do. We've just been here longer and learned, and so we're helping them kind of develop what they're doing. So we're coaching other organizations as well. And then we talked about our Kenya office as well. That's a little bit about who we are at Present Age Ministries. What I want to do is talk a little bit about human trafficking and what it looks like here. Right? What does it look like in Concord, North Carolina? So what we have found, have you all seen the Taken movie? Yeah, okay. For those of you who haven't, basically what happens is Liam Neeson is, the typical Liam Neeson, but his daughter gets kidnapped, very violent kidnapping, drug out from under the bed where she was hiding, and bag over the head, all the things, right? She's taken, she's smuggled across country borders, and then she is sold for sex, commercial sex. Is that human trafficking? Yeah, absolutely it is. Is that what it looks like in Concord, North Carolina? Nope, not really. Out of the hundreds of girls we've served, not one of them have that story. Not one of them have the story of being smuggled into the country for purposes of trafficking. Isn't that interesting? But when we watch the news and we hear those stories, it is good to know, and yes, it does happen, but is that primarily what we're seeing? No. So the other 2 images here we used to use in our marketing. We actually don't anymore because it's not what it looks like, right? And we have an accountability to our girls to tell their stories well. So what we have done is stopped using, the girl in chains. It's a very emotional picture, right? But reality is most of them are out walking around, right? You are going to see them in the grocery store. You're going to see them skipping out of school, right? You're going to see them in the community. They're not chained up in somebody's basement. And so when we can kind of leave those mindsets, we can accurately identify this a little bit better. Well, I will just say one thing real quick on this one here. When our girls tell us that they have 10 to 15 meetups a day or a night, we also have to realize there is a demand for that in our local community, right? If we've served hundreds of girls, and on average it's 10 to 15 per night, per day, right? That means there's 10 to 15 buyers that are willing to purchase a child in our local community. We need Jesus, right? We need Jesus. Now here's the federal law. Essentially what happened here, this passed in 2000. What this law does, it defines human trafficking, and then it defines for those over the age of 18 and those under the age of 18, which is fantastic, right? For those of us in this space, it makes it very clear what's happening with the law. So for those over the age of 18, essentially there has to be force, fraud, or coercion. For those under the age of 18, there does not. So what this law also states is that if that individual is under the age of 18, they do not have to have force, fraud, or coercion, and any exploitation, so any exchange that's happening, it's going to automatically be trafficking. So for us, we think, maybe there's that pimp, that perpetrator, that third-party facilitator. For those under the age of 18, it doesn't have to be there. Interesting, right? The North Carolina state law reiterates the exact same thing. It says for those over the age of 18 versus those under the age of 18, and any exchange that's happening for those under the age of 18, automatically trafficking. What the North Carolina law goes on to say is that mistaking of age is not a defense to prosecution, very clearly. It also says consent of a minor. It's not a defense to prosecution, so don't even try it, right? For those buyers out there, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you say, well, she consented, she was willing. Doesn't matter, she's a minor, right? And also he's happened, but we use the term she just because that's mostly what we see. So when we talk about definitions here, commercial sex, when we talk about exploitation, right, there's that exchange that's happening. So abuse generally is one-on-one, right? Most of us kind of have a grasp of that. When we talk about exploitation, there's that exchange that's happening. And the law says exchange for anything of value. That doesn't just mean cash. That could be shelter, that could be food, that could be all of these different things. And for us, what we see, we work with teenagers, so what do teenagers care about? Clothes, shoes, technology, right? I want those new headphones. My mom said no because they're really expensive, right? I wanted that new dress. Mom said no because it doesn't cover anything, right? All of those things traffickers or perpetrators will use to exchange, right? When we use force, fraud, and coercion, force, most of us understand that as going to be the Taken movie, right? Again, we don't really see that here. Fraud, a lot more common. Most common things we see is, you're so beautiful, why don't you come be a model for me? And then actually I don't have a real modeling agency, and that turns into a lot of manipulation, right? The other most common fraud thing we see right now is, I am making a music video, why don't you come be in my music video? Right? And what 13-year-old doesn't want to hear she's beautiful? What 30-year-old doesn't want to hear she's beautiful, right? And so when that 13-year-old has these other vulnerabilities in life, which a trafficker can usually identify, there's chaos in the home, there's all of these different things happening, they can prey on that individual and will tell them things like this. It's actually way less complicated than we think. Our kiddos are way more vulnerable than we think. Literally, social media, just reaching out, oh, you're so beautiful. Like, it really starts there, and they start building a relationship. Coercion is a little bit more complicated. Essentially, what this looks like is blackmail. So, if you all can picture what blackmail is like, one of our girls, she had a situation where she met him. He wasn't old and creepy. She would know better than to talk to him, right? But she was about 14, and he's 19, and he's so charming, and he's cute. And one day he says, well, why don't you come meet my friends? And she thinks, oh my gosh, I have arrived, right? I have made it. He thinks I'm cool. Yes, we're going to do this. So she goes with him. He takes her to a neighborhood where she's never been before, and he says, you're going to go inside, and you're going to do all of these things. And she says, no, I'm not. He says, yes, you are. She says, no, I'm not. He says, yes, you are. They go back and forth, and eventually he takes out a picture of her little sister and says, if you don't go inside and do this, I'm going to make your little sister do it. At this point, he's been around her for a long time. He's now her boyfriend, right? All of these things, and so she doesn't actually know what he's capable of. So she does it, right? And that's coercion. That's blackmail. So this is a heat map from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and I'll get you that number here in a moment. This basically talks, I mean, you can just see where North Carolina is, right? Where it should be. We have a problem. And you can see kind of those more populated areas. We have a lot of traffic, around New York, all the way down to Florida. We land right in this area about halfway through. We have a lot of large sporting events. We have that international airport. All of those things are factors that play into this. We also have, what is the big industry in Charlotte? Absolutely, yeah. We've got banking, so we've got disposable income. All of those things bring people to our area. I know I'm flying through this, but one of these I really want to focus on. There's one of these that's way higher than anything else that we're currently seeing in our local community. What do you think it is? That's right. Social media, absolutely. Because what happened was the pandemic hit, we brought all of our kiddos home, they were isolated, and then we ramped them up with technology, right? And we tend to think, well, my child is with me in my house, how much safer can they be, right? But the reality is they now have a gaming system, a cell phone, a tablet, a school-issued laptop. And we've seen traffickers use all of those things to reach kiddos, right? They're literally in their bedroom at home, and yet they're not safe. A lot of our young people also don't have this basic understanding of online safety. It's really interesting. We had a 8-year-old boy who was at grandma's house playing games, and he just ran out the front door one day. And she said, "Boy, what are you doing? Get back here." And he said, "Oh, I was taking a picture of the front of the house. My friend wants to see." Friend that he met gaming and built this trust in his little mind, that's my friend, right? Clearly on the other side, that's not another 8. Right? So teaching our young people online safety is really important. We do see all of these things, but social media by far is the most important one. Anytime we talk to youth, we have to talk about online safety. There's a lot of different resources that we give to parents, and we do parent-specific events, because also parents have no idea. There's a law enforcement officer in Chicago, and he was asked, "When do I give my child a cell phone? At what age is appropriate?" And he said, "Whenever you would hand them a gun." Really, in our world, most of our girls, the girls that we are seeing right now, if they did not already know their perpetrator, then they met online. And what's happening is they are not being kidnapped, because basically this trafficker will just start liking photos and sending little messages to 10 people, right? And if one of them responds, then I just start talking to 9 other ones, right? I don't have to go to a high school football game anymore. I don't have to go out to the mall anymore. I can just start liking, and if they respond to me, that shows me they're desperate for attention, right? There's some vulnerability there. And our young people post their whole lives and everything they've ever eaten on social media, right? And so for a trafficker, he can just scroll through and see all these vulnerabilities. You hate math, you hate your mom, she won't let you have that cute dress and won't let you go to that party. Got it. That's all I need, right? And so then we start talking about, well, I can fill those needs for you. I care about you. I understand you, right? All of these things traffickers will say, perpetrators will say. So victims can be anybody. Oftentimes we think, and I use the terms male and female a lot. That's just primarily what we see. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen to males as victims. Doesn't mean traffickers are not female. But primarily that's what's happening in our local area. One thing I do want to talk about is that victims are not delinquent or bad kids. We don't have bad kids. You know what I mean? They're making some really poor choices. I'm not going to argue that. But when you can look at their life and see where they're coming from, you understand why they're skipping school. You understand why they make the decisions they make. One of our girls had 2 younger siblings. Mom has multiple jobs just trying to keep the lights on, right? And so it's our 14-year-old girl's responsibility to cook dinner for her 2 younger siblings every night. Problem is, she can't drive to go get food. She can't go to the grocery store. She can't do all of these things. And so for her, trafficker said, well, how about this? You do something for me, I'll do something for you. I'll provide dinner for your 2 younger siblings if you do these things for me. And she said, absolutely, I will, right? And then very quickly realized, actually, I don't like this. Actually, I want out of this. And at that point, he's already been in her home. He knows her younger siblings. She's terrified of what he might actually do, and she continues until we got involved. So that's a little bit of the reality there. Most of our girls do not recognize they are the victim of a crime. They do not know that this is one of those things that is actually illegal, right? When you're being manipulated, it's very similar to like domestic violence. When you're being manipulated, it's very hard to see those things when you're in it, right? From the outside, it's a lot easier to see. It's a lot easier for us to go, something's really wrong with that. Even sometimes just that one encounter. I'm out at lunch and I see, that couple sitting at that table. Maybe there's 2 cell phones sitting out there. She won't order for herself. She doesn't make eye contact, right? He seems very controlling. Your gut's like, something is wrong here, right? All of those things can be something wrong, right? But what happens for our girls, generally, even once they're separated from law enforcement, once they're even, with us, with law enforcement has separated from that trafficker, they're with us for 6 to 9 months before they realize they were the victim of a crime. That's us. That's what, usually in counseling, that's weekly sessions with us. That's probably about 4 touch points a week with us. And it still takes about 6 to 9 months for them to realize, oh shoot, I was manipulated. Right? And so that's just the reality for them. That also means that they're not going to come running up to you asking for your help. Right? And so when we can understand that as a community, especially our law enforcement thinks, oh, they're going to come ask me for help. I promise you, no, they're not. Right? Not our young people, and adults usually don't either. Even when there's like that signage in the airport, if you're being trafficked, call this number. It's better than nothing, right? But majority of people can't recognize that me internally, I am being trafficked. Most of them do not identify that way. They might say, yeah, he's really awful sometimes, but he loves me. It's my boyfriend, right? And so they can't see it. But when we have signage that says, hey, community, if you see these warning signs like this, please do something. That goes way farther. So these are some of those things. Fearful of law enforcement, inconsistencies in a story. That's not necessarily manipulation. That might just be trauma. Complex trauma can do that to your brain, right? And I think most of us can probably understand that. Overly tired. What teenager is not tired? But overly tired is the key there, right? Because chances are, we had a girl who, she was 16. I don't know why I keep pointing over there like there's somebody over there. There's not. I think my office is that way in my mind. I don't know. We have had a 16-year-old who would go to bed. You know, mom would put her to bed at 10 o'clock p.m., you know, every school night, and then come wake her up at 6 a.m. She's 16. What mom is going to go in there in between, right? But the reality is she had met trafficker. He gave her a second cell phone. He said, every time I call you, you better answer. Right? And at this point, she's scared. She doesn't know how to get out of this. He's threatened her family. She doesn't want to put her family in danger. So at 10:30, she sneaks out. She meets him. She's trafficked all night, and he drops her off at 5:30 before she gets up at 6. Right? So she's overly tired. Right? A lot of our kiddos, we had a situation where the perpetrator would pick her up in the car rider line, just like every other parent, right? He would come through, pick her up, traffic her for a few hours, and drop her off before mom got home from work at 6. So eventually, mom said she has health issues. What's going on? Her body is breaking down. Right? Something is wrong with my child. Bringing her to the hospital over and over. Hospital says, well, we don't know. She's got back pain. She's got these different things. We don't know, right? Give her Tylenol, I guess. And so after about 3 or 4 visits, our hospital staff said, you know what? I think I do know what's happening here. And they were able to identify the situation. So when we talk about runaways, the Department of Justice issued a statistic that said within 48 hours, 1 out of 3 runaways will be approached by a trafficker. That is fast, right? But what happens is that trafficker says, oh, you look hungry and homeless, right? I can jump in here. Let me provide those things for you, and then you provide something for me. And that's how that works. So what do we do about it? This is the National Human Trafficking Hotline phone number. You can call them. You can text them. You can also reach out to Present Age Ministries anytime. But the benefit of this is that maybe we don't have enough information to make a case, but what we can do is then put together different tips, right? So maybe you call today and we're like, I was out at lunch, Cami said this stuff, so I'm going to call just because my gut feels weird. And they say, well, thank you for giving us the tip. You know, this isn't enough information for us to open up a case, but we will, you know, keep this on file. And you say, thank you so much, and you go about your life, and you say, Jesus, get it, right? And then maybe tomorrow they're in Atlanta, and then somebody else in Atlanta sees the situation, calls in the tip, and now we have enough information for law enforcement to investigate. So that's the benefit of this number. I will leave it up here for quite a while, and we'll go ahead and move into some questions if we're all right with that. And that was rapid fire information.
Thanks, Cami. Questions? Comments? Hold on one sec.
This was a couple of years ago. My daughter got a job there at an ice cream store. And, she probably was over 18 and going to college, but she recognized that, these guys were asking her questions and trying to become friends and stuff like that. And it kind of, she talked to us about it, thank God, and she was smart enough to recognize something and we ended up telling her that she's got to, quit that job and get a job somewhere else. And
Good job, parent.
but yeah, it was just concerning about the police that it just didn't seem like there was any way to, because these guys stand around the mall and places and they're there, but they can't do anything about it.
Yes, they're not actually currently committing a crime. So law
Right,
enforcement's
so
kinda
I guess
stuck.
my question is just about, working with the police to recognize this and doing whatever they can do to stop it. Now, being here, I recognize this. There's so much more than just that mall situation, but
So Concord Mills, absolutely a hot spot, and I will say it until they change something. We've had that discussion many times. Have you all noticed that they now have requirements that if you're under the age of 18, you can't be by yourself?
Yeah.
Guess where that came from? Right. So on the positive side, they finally did something. On the negative side, we can do more, right? How we partner with law enforcement and what law enforcement is doing in our community, I will applaud the Cabarrus County Sheriff's Office all day. They are phenomenal. The detectives are amazing. And then Ashley Shanley, the district attorney, she's running for district attorney-elect. Nobody's even running against her. She's that awesome. Right?
She's really not.
We work very tightly with all of them, and this is actually the model county of what we try to replicate down in Mecklenburg, in Rowan, and all of these different areas. Even California is looking at our model in different areas, Northern California and Southern California, to replicate what we do. So we have some phenomenal law enforcement. 2 issues. They are overrun with the issue. So cybertipline.org, that's another place where you can just report information, even if it's suspected abuse. It's a great way to report if somebody has some pictures out there or videos that they made or somebody made of them. That's a great place to report all of that, and that's where you can get some traction. What happens is that goes to this group and to Internet Crimes Against Children. So several of our local law enforcement sit on that task force as well as on the FBI task force. And so it's all kind of together, but what they do is they pursue those different situations, right? Right now, I think they've had a 35% increase since last year. I mean, they get millions of tips, which is horrifying as a society, right? And that's mostly about underage. That's mostly minors. Adults tend to kind of just live with it and get support services, but not necessarily pursue. Minors, it's a little bit different, right? But the cyber tip line, that's one of those things. The other aspect for law enforcement is that in our local community, they will do reverse stings, which is phenomenal. But they did it for 1 hour and caught 13 people. So again, they had to stop. Because we have arrested so many, we have to process them, right? And all of this happening. And so whenever they do reverse stings, they are phenomenal. They are trying to make it a priority because it is such an issue here. North Carolina is number 9 out of all 50 states. And the Charlotte metro area is number 1 in North Carolina. So they are doing their best. Some of our law enforcement are just absolute amazing people who, give everything they can to support this. So we definitely support our law enforcement partners. Does that make sense?
Okay. So question and comment. First, I can't let it go without being said. I'm really glad that Ms. Shanley is working for you guys, but I have a very, very different perspective on her. So if folks are willing to listen to that, I'm ready to speak with you. Secondly, so I know that a very at-risk community in our group in our community is our LGBTQ children and teens, especially our trans and kids who come out to families who are not welcoming. I know of one who just got kicked out of their house because I'm a member of a group here that works with them. So who's working with them? I know I understand you're a faith-based group, but most of those kids are not going to go to you. So who works with them?
They are coming to us because they don't necessarily know that they're not accepted. Right? We don't have that perspective that just because you identify, we've literally had a child identify as cat. Right? And for us, we roll our eyes because we know God's truth, right? But here's the thing, is you are not ready to hear that. right? These kiddos are coming out of crisis, they're in trauma, all of these things. And so just like Emily was talking about today, it's identity, right? They're looking for an identity and they're identifying as gender something, as sexuality something. But the thing is like, no, we just want you to identify as loved. When you know you're loved, that's where the next step comes. So most of our girls are not cisgender identifying, right? They are somewhere on the spectrum of something else, right? Because also the world that they live in, society is telling them all of these other things are healthy options. Go explore, right? And for us, we say there is a God's best. And so if they want to bring up that conversation, we're happy to talk about it. But reality is most of the time we're just listening because there is so much other stuff in your life. When you feel loved and you feel like all of these other aspects come into alignment, often those things then kind of play themselves out or we kind of can readdress it later. Does that make sense?
So is your group trans affirming or not?
I don't know. What I would say if you want to talk further is let me connect you to one of our team members who would have that conversation with the actual kiddos. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I have two questions that may not be that related. First one is, what would be the percentage of girls who are induced to doing this, getting into the trafficking because of drug dependence by their manipulators?
Great question. Very few. Usually what we are seeing is the trafficker will then supply some type of substance because they cannot cope with what's happening to them. There's so much trauma, they can't cope with it, right? So then they will, basically the trafficker will supply something. Once they come to us, once they're separated from this, once they start healing through their trauma, usually the drugs and all of that falls away.
Okay, good. Second question, Facebook. We have a granddaughter who's in college. She's over 18. And the pictures that her friends, that age group put up are in some ways very provocative. They're maybe so obsessed with their bodies and how nice they look. I mean, they're nice looking, but I mean, to flaunt that kind of on the internet, I wonder if that's fodder for some of these people, even if they're over 18.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's where we talk about those cultural influences, right? Where society has turned digital and really our young people. So y'all want to know something horrifying? A 12-year-old told us sending nude pictures is the new first base.
Ooh.
Right.
Ooh.
Yes. This is typical. Another, I think she was 13, said, well, if you give out your phone number, first thing you can expect is either getting pictures or them asking for pictures. Right. And so when they're growing up in this world, these are those influences. A picture on Facebook is nothing to them. I had clothes on, right? And so that's their perspective. But as a culture, as a society, we've definitely gone down this road where it's more acceptable, right? And so again, kind of going back to that identity, whatever you identify as, however you identify right now, we just want to love you for who you are. And what we see is those things tend to fall away. Where she's going to recognize that actually I'm more valuable than my body. And so then those pictures kind of tend to come down. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
We have about 3 minutes. Anyone have another question? All right. Thank you, Cammie.
Thank you so much.
We
Really
appreciate
you
this.
guys letting me be so intense with you today.